to vote on. Before, well, yes, sure. Oh, they can be postponed easily. Before we get to that stage, let me just welcome Betsy Harding, who in all likelihood will be joining us as a full voting member in mid-July. So you can join us. Yeah, you're welcome.
And Betsy. We're welcoming group, yes.
Closer to the candy.
Smart.
All right, so let's take up a series of 3 minutes, I believe. I don't know.
I was just wondering what part of town she was representing.
I'm not sure what that's.
I guess it's pretty central. I'm in Cumberland Crossing, the people, this over the hill gang.
Oh, just down the road. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Cumberland Center then.
Okay.
Yep. So first up are the minutes of our meeting of May 22nd. Where we floated the draft survey. And anybody have any questions or input on those minutes? I'll take a motion to approve as printed.
I make a motion to accept the meetings as written.
Thanks, Lorraine. First, anybody?
Second.
Waiting for the second. Oh, okay. Thank you. All right, that's done. Next up, minutes of May 29, the night on which we actually voted to finalize the survey and to send it. Any questions or comments of those minutes? And a motion to adopt.
You adopt as read.
You, anybody? Second, those in favor. Did I call for a vote after that?
No,
you
did. I thought you were doing
Okay.
it.
Hello, Steve. It's been too long. Back on the May 22nd minutes and Lorraine's motion, those in favor?
Thank
All
you.
right, that's retroactive. Okay, final set from June 12th. And this is the night we broke out into our 3 umbrella subcommittees for the first time. So they're not minutes in the usual sense, in that they don't reflect the give and take of a single meeting, but rather the summary of 3 meetings which took place simultaneously. So is there a motion with respect to those minutes?
Looking for Cumberland Meadows. Yep, come this way.
Kathy, I'll call on you for a motion.
I make a motion to accept the minutes for June 12th.
All right, thank you, Kathy. Exactly. Okay, all right, thanks.
And a vote.
Oh, and a vote, yes. You've been on this on.
All right.
Get these things on.
You're all in favor for this.
All right.
Minutes.
Great meeting. So Bridget has a survey update for us. Oh, by the way, we have yet another prospective member.
Jane Wilson.
Jane
Yeah.
Wilson, who I've known for 35, 40 years, something like that.
Definitely.
No, not that, more like
Birthday
35.
Yeah.
Classmates with my older daughter.
And
Exactly, of course, yeah.
Okay, we didn't need
I'm 40.
Only.
So, this is true, Betsy, her nomination would be considered by the council on July 14th. Well, welcome to the table and welcome to the meeting.
Thank you.
So Bridget, survey update.
Survey update. We have one more week of at least a published opening. So we'll close the end of the day on the 3rd. And we have 817 as of when I checked a few minutes ago. I've received about 20 paper copies back that I've inputted in. And we've probably handed out a total of like 50 to 70, probably closer to 75 paper copies because we did a mailing of some paper copies. And Ava and I are planning on attending the Active Living lunch on Monday with
Oh,
paper
good.
copies for those in hand, and we'll bring pens and try and get some more return.
Great.
So we did,
Bridget, what do we normally average in a survey, like the previous surveys?
I think the last survey we had about 20%.
30, I think.
The comp plan or the 2022 survey?
Oh, that was, yeah, you're right, 20% for the one 3 years ago, which was a duplicate of the one from 07, which was 30%.
Okay.
I don't know how that translated into.
I was gonna say, can someone do the math for me, like 20% of what number?
We're at
Have to,
about 8,500 people.
85, so 20%.
We have about 10%.
okay, all right. And then last Saturday, Meg and Nancy were at the farmer's market. And did I read that you plan to be there again? No, this weekend?
Thank you, but no. Is it rain again?
I think Bob is free though.
It rains off of that.
Right, back to business as usual.
Yeah.
How was business then?
It was great.
Good.
Yeah,
Good.
it was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who else was there?
Nancy.
Thank you. Yeah. So if anybody wants to volunteer, I understand that the outlook, the forecast is not great, so, but it was a beautiful Saturday.
It was.
Yeah.
It was.
Richard, we don't have our next meeting until July 10th,
Correct.
which is technically after closure of the survey.
Mhm.
Do you want to discuss possible extension of time, or do we want to just kind of roll with that on the 10th?
It's up to you all.
Of the survey itself.
No, yeah, for the deadline.
Yeah, I mean, I think the deadline should at least go through Sunday at midnight because no one's gonna start processing anything till Monday.
True.
So
So what would Sunday be? The
Sunday's the 6th, yeah,
6th?
because the 3rd and the 4th, obviously everyone's off.
I don't even close the survey till Monday
I
morning.
until you all tell us to, so.
Yeah.
Does that conflict with anything, Christian?
No, if you want to leave it open longer, that can be done. If you want to call it on the 10th, that's possible. If you want to call it on the 6th, that's great too. So
Bridget, were you planning on compiling stuff before the 10th?
No.
Josh, we just started. We've approved minutes and we're talking about the deadline of the survey, which currently is July 3rd, discussing a possible extension of days. We have 817 responses as of this
Wow.
evening. So Evan, your suggestion is to extend to end of
I
day.
would say at least, at least midnight on Sunday or Monday at beginning of the workday.
Okay. Okay. Makes sense to me. I hope that my sense is there are a lot of folks who would respond and have yet to act on that. And, I'd like to get a percentage up there as high as we can. So a few extra days won't set back the works or impact what we're doing. So
Did something want today's prior to emphasize?
It is set to. I don't know if the crier's gone out yet, but yeah. And it seems like we get when we do a crier push or a social media push, we get, good return, like 70 to 80 people in one day.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and we actually saw it on Saturday, so thank you. And maybe that was because we had some farmers market people.
Good job.
I'm very loud.
all right, so we have the Monday event coming up. 55 plus. That's big.
Yeah, she usually gets about 80 people at the luncheon.
Yeah.
Some have probably already participated. Some probably forgot that they have it sitting on their desk somewhere, so.
Yep. Yep.
Is there a way to do a daily email burst or some sort?
I did get a recent email about the survey.
Okay.
One of the,
Like a crier?
Or
No,
separate?
this was a separate email.
Like a
Yeah,
regular, like.
Yeah,
Cool.
from the town. I deleted it, sorry, I would tell you, because I already had done the survey, but I actually got, yeah.
Maybe
I got one.
You're on a
Yeah.
25th.
Yeah,
Yeah, nice.
Time is quickly running out to share input.
yeah.
It's also, it was also published in the Forecaster, what's now the Forecaster. The link to the survey and like a short article if you haven't been following the drama on Facebook. So that's been published and pushed out too, so that's good.
Okay. Evan, you wanna just make a motion?
Sure, I'll make a motion to extend the survey opening until the end of day on Sunday, the 7th.
At the end of the day on Monday.
End of the day on Monday, the 8th.
Monday.
Monday, the 7th. Oh, there we go. Monday, the 7th.
Okay, is there a second to the motion? Okay, Scott seconds. Those in favor? Any discussion first, I guess? Those in favor? Any opposed, abstentions? All right, that carries unanimously. Kathy, you had asked earlier, where Betsy lived in town, and I think I can inform you that Jane lives on Range Road, technically part of the center.
Oh, okay.
All right, so, we are now in that, interim period between issuance of the survey and the end date. And we've, elected tonight to, hear a presentation from, Kristen, on our zoning ordinance and related issues. So that's ready, I think, to go with that. And this is, it's good, Betsy, that both you and Jane are able to make it tonight because this is important. It could be an important learning experience because it's, it takes a while to absorb. So glad you could come to it. And we will be dealing to some extent with various aspects of the zoning ordinance, particularly dealing with probably lot sizes and things of that nature. And when you're done, Christian, we may have an update on two bills that were passed and signed into law.
Boy, oh boy, do we. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, so, there's more lot size stuff going on, from the state level than, we really considered to this point.
I mean,
Oh, cool, bad thing.
I'm on team three.
I got it. Cool. Next is great. Thank you so much. I thought we are gonna get into like a really good or you know ahead of time.
So I'm next right now.
Yes, sorry. Wait. Cool. So, hello, good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. This is what normal people, reasonably consider a boring topic. So, like, treat yourself to snacks, relax, enjoy, ask questions. It's also exciting because we have a couple extra, like, experts in the room, thinking of like Lori and Bridget, as well as counselors. So, like, if you all think this was misrepresented, bring up a question or a concern or whatever, like keep this casual and have it a free flowing conversation. So there are two reasons for doing this tonight, our little zoning audit. First is that prior to starting your comprehensive planning work, we promised that we would do it for you. We've been sort of offering barriers to housing zoning audit to all our member communities. You all were one of the folks that took up on it. And so it's essentially just like looking through the zoning code and saying, are there barriers that don't explicitly need to be there to housing production? The other part, again, is that it's part of our comprehensive planning process. We think it's helpful when we're talking about, where you're coming from and where your goals are trying to take you, what kind of community you want to be. Do your ordinances actually reflect that? So it's just good to spend some time looking through all of them. So this would be great. Couple caveats here. This is just a particular perspective on the zoning code in a particular point of time, acknowledging different paths and different items that reasonable people could disagree on. It's also, as Steve mentioned, a mild heads up to a couple bills that are coming down the pipe sort of regardless. So good to be thinking about it. Also, frankly, reinforces the importance of the work that you all are doing as the comp plan committee in terms of determining your growth areas and rural areas for your future land use map moving forward. Couple things this is not. It is not a value judgment. I am not telling you what you should or shouldn't do. I am acknowledging, we as GPPOG are acknowledging that there are options. Again, reasonable people can disagree. We are not the boss of you. We are not telling you what you should or shouldn't do. We're not requesting nicely or meanly that you do it. We're just acknowledging that these are options. So a couple of just baseline rules of sort of how we approach this. First of all, you have a set of land use ordinances. Anybody can go online and read them. Usually the things that sort of directly impact what we are broadly interested in here tonight are your site plan standards, your subdivision standards, and your zoning. So that's what we focused on, just reading through, seeing what we noticed, and raising a couple items for you all and potentially for staff and council. One of the frameworks, again, this grew out of an initial effort to think about barriers to housing, acknowledging that we are in a broader regional statewide housing crisis. So again, as just a service, this was initially envisioned as with a lens that flexibility allows for housing and barriers that aren't explicitly needed for health, safety, state law, that anything above and beyond what is absolutely strictly necessary is therefore a hindrance to housing. So again, you don't have to make that value call that that's the right move, but again, that's just the lens that we're taking initially. And also, frankly, to make it useful to you all on a slightly broader topic in terms of community character and community development and sustainability or resilience or any number of other sort of hot topics that are important to members of the town, members of the planning committee, members of the council. We just sort of, anytime you see something, you say something. So we try to note when there seems to be something that might be of interest to you all. And so specifically, zoning codes are kind of dry, they're kind of long, they're kind of, zoning codes. And so we wanted to acknowledge potential changes also just because you have the zoning code you have doesn't mean it has to be the zoning code you have moving forward. Like these things can be changed. Speaking of which, I think it's important to remember sometimes that the folks who adopted zoning decades ago, they were not like some unfathomable being that had knowledge vastly beyond yours. They were flesh and blood human beings with the same, challenges and excitements and everything we all do. So it's just the man behind the curtain. We are all the man behind the curtain. So don't think of what is there as too precious, because again, it's a set of rules that folks decided on a while ago. If it will serve you now, great. If they don't, they can be changed. And so again, you can change those rules if you want different outcomes. And again, just tying this to the work that you all are doing as a complement committee, zoning and land use is explicitly supposed to be a reflection of the future land use map that you all are going to produce as part of your determination of what are growth areas and what are rural areas, what are their transition rates in between. So this is explicitly intended to allow for potential changes if you see that. And then one last caveat, I know I keep alluding to this vaguely. We're going to go through the stuff that we already were going to bring up regardless. But there were a couple state laws that will make it even more spicy moving forward. So we're going to acknowledge those afterwards. But we want to just go through the meat of the land use code. So this is a bit of an inverse example, and I know that it sounds like a planner, am beating up on zoning, and I'm not trying to do that. I am trying to acknowledge that it is hard to successfully legislate exactly what you want without any adverse consequences. And so one of the things that stuck out to us when we were reading through your code was one of your overlay districts. And this is goofy in a lovely way. The purpose of the Fairgrounds Overlay District is to allow as permitted uses a diverse range of exhibitions, shows, fairs, entertainment programs, and similar events, both related to and not related to agriculture, of the type commonly and historically associated with the Commonwealth Fairgrounds. And like, there's a list of 20 different things that can happen there, and those range from barbecues to like horse racing to like boat shows. And that's rad. That is a totally legitimate and reasonable use of a fairground, but it's notable how wide and broad they tried to make that statement. Whereas if you were going to 30 years ago say, this is what we're going to use our fairgrounds for, it would be very, very hard to come up with a comprehensive list. And even in the ordinance, it says it's impossible to come up with a comprehensive list. So we're going to let the code enforcement officer decide on a case-to-case basis. That is often in contrast to basically every other aspect of zoning, wherein folks say, often with a sense of, we do not want X, Y, or Z, so we're going to tell you exactly what we do want. But when you say exactly what you do want and don't allow for anything else, then again, that has consequences. It means that there might be less sort of organic development. It's going to be a particular style. There might be added cost to development because of the different dimensional requirements that are set down. So we are simply acknowledging that ordinances have consequences. There is a benefit to being flexible, and there is a benefit to being rigid and directing exactly what you want. And sometimes those things are in conflict. So we're going to start with subdivision. And again, a lot of these things, some of you are going to be deeply familiar with. Some of you will never want to touch with a 15-foot pole, and that's reasonable. So if I'm going too high or too low, like by all means, let me know. So subdivision is functionally when there is a lot and we say, the community says, we want this to be more than one lot. We want to have more than one, technically the number is 3 with a new state law. I think it's going up to 5.
Make it 3.
5 dwelling units.
5, right, thank you. So this is where it gets complicated. So with subdivision, we are both talking about splitting lots, and in certain circumstances, we are talking about multiple units in one structure. And so if you are proposing to do that, to either create an apartment building or a condo building with a certain number of units, or to say, hey, I've got this big lot and I want to make it like 10, why not just divide it up? There is a state law that governs the regulations and requirements that you have to acknowledge and go through to make sure that that works. And is in the interest of the state of Maine. There is some local jurisdiction over that and the process to increase the level of the standards necessary for certain items. So there are 3 sort of basic ways that you all deal with that. One is just a traditional, hey, I want this lot to be 7 lots, and so we're going to go through the process. We're just going to divide it up into 7 lots. There is also something that I know Lorraine knows very, very well, the conservation subdivision. And that is essentially a requirement in the RR1 and RR2 zones. I say essentially because if I understand it correctly, a developer can propose they have to put forth a plan for conservation subdivision. But if they want, they may put forward a plan for a traditional subdivision. And then the planning board will say which one they think is better. We'll get into the high level of what each of these are in just a second. The cluster subdivision is similar, but not quite the same as the conservation subdivision. It is not allowed in RR1 or RR2, which is a pretty huge amount of your zoning. And it seems like the conservation and the cluster subdivisions, it seems like they're probably the preference of the people of Cumberland, in terms of it says like, hey, we want to preserve open space and we want to, find ways to use our land responsibly. But other than the mandate of doing a conservation subdivision in RR1 and RR2 zones, there's no actual incentive to do it. So instead of saying, if you do it this way, we'll let you develop more units, it just says, for instance, with a cluster subdivision, correct me if I'm wrong, if you want to do a cluster subdivision, that's great, but you're not explicitly incentivized to do so. And so all of this is one more way of saying there's a lot of different ways to get this stuff. And if you know, if the community has a sense of what kind of development they want, then it probably behooves the community to make that very clear and either incentivize or mandate that kind of development, because otherwise it just is a lot of options.
What defines it as a cluster? And sorry if it's not.
Oh, no, that's the perfect thing. So a cluster subdivision is ostensibly, and we can go into the meat of this, we have it on Excel spreadsheet and everything. Essentially, as it is described in your code, it's trying to allow dwelling units to be closer together so as to not impact as much of the home. So you can still have a lot of open space on the parcel. So in some ways, it's very, very related to conservation subdivision. So in that sense, there's an incentive and then you have a little bit more flexibility. But it's not, it doesn't give you more use for doing that. Is that fair?
Yeah, and conservation subdivision requires 50% of the parcel to be put into conservation. There's various mechanisms for that conservation, but the cluster, that open space is not necessarily conserved land.
Yes, thank you. And if we go to the next step, that's correct. So again, reasonable people can disagree here. We're just doing a little illustrated exercise. Sometimes folks will talk about subdivision. I don't mean in Cumberland, I mean just like generally across communities as like the way that you experience the community, sort of trying to regulate that. So if you're driving down Route 1, and you're judging your perception of a community from that perspective, that is one way to think about, a community pattern. Another would be to think about explicitly how much open space is being saved, how many houses are on the land, what is the balance between those things. There's multiple ways that you can get at that. So if you can advance it one, here we have 16 orange dots on that. That land could be any size, we could scale it up or down. And so you could think of this as a traditional subdivision in the sense of, all right, there's 16 houses, we're probably gonna make 16 lots. Let's spread them out equally across this parcel, which could be huge, could be small. Okay, yeah, I thought we were on that, yeah.
Getting there.
I trust your judgment. And so alternatively, you could have the same number of houses on the same chunk of land with, depending on how you consider it, less impact to that land and a more efficient use of resources. What this may or may not do is if somebody is going by these chunks of land in their car or on the sidewalk or whatever, they may perceive a density that you wouldn't otherwise perceive. A bunch of houses are spread amongst a large parcel and they're forested and there's buffers. It might feel more rural. And or if you're in the middle of this parcel, it might feel more rural. So it sort of just, again, depends how you want to make those judgments. So there's no wrong answer. So this is where we get into a value judgment about housing, which is we just added 8 more housing units to this parcel. Are 8 housing units worth the additional impact to the land, the additional density, the additional quality of character? I do not know. Nobody knows. Reasonable people could disagree. So this is just to say you can sort of also add in that idea of if you decide you want a cluster subdivision to be the style of development in town because there are downstream effects of it that you find beneficial, then you can incentivize that by saying things like, if you do a cluster style subdivision, you get a 50%, I'm not good at math, bonus on like what you can develop. So there's just, again, different ways that you could do it. None are wrong. Thank you. Another concept that is interesting, and this comes up throughout your zoning code, but especially in subdivision, is that of net residential area. And this is, again, just a fundamental question of, so the way that it works is if you have a parcel and you want to develop that parcel, you first subtract all of the wetlands and things like grades of extreme slope that might be dangerous to go on. And then using that amount, then you say, okay, we have 50,000 acres left over. Just very big parcel, I realize. So now if I can do, X number of units per acre, I have to use the 50,000, which was the net residential area, as opposed to the 3 million acres that was initially the parcel. And so that is not wrong or right. It's just the way that you calculate it in your code. One could also argue that the whole area could be considered the base that you do that division for. And as long as you don't build in the wetlands, you can cluster your houses appropriately. You might get more housing on the same amount of land with not a proportionate amount of impact because you're not going into those sensitive areas. But that's just an option. So this gets into, again, sort of the potential paths forward that you all have if you so choose, that council can pull on the levers if they so choose. You could say, if you do it this way, you get a density bonus or some other incentive. You could say, hey, we actually really like cluster subdivisions, and we want those to be allowed in RR1 and RR2, where currently they're prohibited. You could simply make one more appealing by changing the dimensional standards. So we mentioned before that technically the cluster subdivision is a little looser in some of its like setbacks and buffers and requirements. It could be a lot more loose. Like there's a lot of sway that you all have over dimensional requirements, or a community has over dimensional requirements. So if you wanted to make it really appealing, you could probably fundamentally change those. And that would be, again, an incentive of more housing, but it's another way to possibly pull a lever just to get the kind of outcome that you want, if that's what you choose. Another thing that sort of comes up in the context of the code is that it's pretty easy to think of it in terms of like individual dwelling units in single family homes. Your code does have provision for multiplex and garden apartments. But those could probably be facilitated more if you so chose by making some policy decisions or changes to the language. I make them more easy.
What's a garden apartment?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that because
I've heard the word, I don't actually know what it is.
so it is
Patio home, does that mean anything to you?
No,
It's a single,
like a tiny home in a garden.
like a single story connected home.
I have no idea why it's
Connected separate entrance. Yeah, so think, if you know where the little houses are, right across the street from, Food Stop, the little yellow village green houses. They're two separate units, but they're connected, their garages are connected. So it's one structure on the surface of the land, but it's two units. And it's, single story type living.
And so this gets into weirdnesses and.
That's not considered a duplex?
So the way that it's defined, and I literally, with you all as a witness, I have a star and it says, why is this defined? Apparently is a multifamily dwelling in which units share a common outside access. Garden apartment buildings may have dwelling units on 2 levels, and each unit has secondary outside access by way of a patio or porch. Entrance drives, parking areas, open space, and any recreational facilities are shared in common by all occupants. So that is in contrast to a multiplex, which is all similar to I'll have to find it. I think it's dwelling unit, comma multiplex, something like that. Yeah, there it is. A building containing 3 or more dwelling units, including apartment buildings and condominiums. So there's a particular point in your code where you essentially say particular standards about garden apartments. So I assume at some point they were either desirable or not. I don't actually know which one, because somebody was really thinking about garden apartments. And I was really fascinated by the backstory and I was hoping you all would actually be able to.
So Christian, earlier in your presentation, you had a picture of what I would call townhouses. And that's in North Yarmouth, so that, Bridget, would we call those townhouses in Cumberland? Like, or is that a multiplex?
That's a great question.
I'm just curious because when I drive by that, I'm like, why don't we have that in Cumberland? When I drive to Wyndham, you pass Camping World and the Tractor Supply, immediately on your right, there's the cutest little single family homes. They're small, but and I'm like, those are perfect starter homes for somebody that, just got their first job in Cumberland. And I'm like, why don't we have those in Cumberland? So it's kind of like, and how would you define those? Do we already define them, or is that something that we might be looking at in the future of, if we want to allow that, how do we define that? So just not to be answered right now, but just throwing that out.
That's great. Honestly, I swear I didn't pay Lori to do this. That teases it up very nicely in the sense of, there are just weird quirks of different codes and decisions that folks made. One of the things that we sort of noted as we went through, were literally, hey, maybe don't use multiplex, maybe just use multifamily. And for instance, there's a definition of family in the zoning code, and that gets awkward and weird and complicated really fast. So maybe just strike the definition of family. There's little small things that probably won't matter in the sense of it probably doesn't matter if you call it a multiplex or an apartment or a garden apartment, but it doesn't make it any easier to use. And so these are the discussions that are absolutely, in my opinion, worth having. And I think we could go to
When we were on the housing task force, we went through all the zoning codes too. And we could not figure out why there were separate definitions for garden apartment and multiplex, and how that would even help the planning board or anything. So, and then I went through it again when I was building my house and tried to understand all the rules. I still couldn't figure it out.
Part of it is fun, it's just a goofy little quirk, which is kind of delightful. I have plenty of goofy little quirks, but
You're not a code.
so there are some drawbacks to it. I know we spent a lot of time on subdivision, and also it's interesting, there's different codes are organized in different ways. Sometimes folks have a set of technical standards that are referred to their site plan and their subdivision. Sometimes, parking minimums will be in site plan, other times they'll be in zoning. So, it sort of can be organized different ways. I think our first takeaway with, subdivision was like, ooh, there's some meat here in terms of what kind of development patterns you want. And with site plan, it was like, it's kind of fine. There's stuff that could be tweaked or improved, but it didn't seem like there was a huge takeaway of, oh, this is a fundamental question of why are you doing it this way versus another. We will acknowledge briefly that there were a couple things that, again, sort of barriers to housing. There were some specifications about buffers for access drives and parking lots, where technically that could reduce the flexibility on a smaller parcel. So, you know, if it doesn't need to be there, maybe it shouldn't be there. If that's important to the aesthetics and the values of the community, maybe it should. Similarly, oh,
Sorry, could you give us kind of maybe everybody else knows the answer, but could you just like give us a holistic overview of what the most common buffer requirements are that we sort of see in our code? Like, sorry.
You want me to?
Oh, sorry. It's really not that high.
it's not exactly, but it's not exactly.
Christian, could you repeat your question?
Sorry, so she was asking about the buffer requirements sort of going across, the whole land use code. Like, is there sort of a standard, buffer that's required? And there's a bunch, there should be an Excel in Cumberland, that if you could open that up, that would be super great. Thank you. So there's different kinds of buffers. In subdivision, one of the things that we flagged was, across, I think, at least conservation and cluster, maybe traditional as well. There was a requirement that around the entirety of the parcel, you have to have a 75-foot buffer. Or, you know, for one of them, it might have been 90 or 150. But the idea that around the entirety of the thing, it should be buffered in some way. And
Like a plant or a
oh, yeah, by like trees or exactly, or, you know, at least space presumably with some vegetation.
Okay.
Then there are setbacks, which are kind of like buffers. And those vary across zones, and those can be anywhere from like 30 feet per side setback to a lot more than 30 feet. No, I guess 30 feet is generally the biggest one. But then often you'll have a front setback that is anywhere from 50 feet to 15 feet. And sides for rear setbacks can vary as well. And going back to our wizard behind the curtain slide, these are just choices. Like, these are like, there are benefits and drawbacks to all of them in different ways. Sorry, go ahead.
And not to confuse it, but we have a setback overlay district
Oh,
as
yeah.
well, which allows for reductions in setbacks in certain areas of town. So, yeah, there's a lot going on.
A lot.
Mhm.
So you may notice, we tried really hard on this first one to capture like the specifics of the details, like 4 asterisks, and then down below, there's like 4 little arrow things would be like exceptions, because there were always exceptions. This is the first tab of just regular stuff. There's a second tab of overlay district. And pretty quickly, we realized, like, if we were to capture all of the nuance of this, it would be absurd. And we're just going to do one note and say, go to the original code if you want the specific details about this, because, and so that's just acknowledging Bridget's point of, arguably, your code is more complicated than it needs to be. There are some things that there are lots of zones. There are lots of overlay zones. There are some overlay zones that could probably be just regular zones. So if you wanted to do it just as a like facilitating ease of use and understanding of your code, aside from questions of sustainability or resilience or preservation or housing. You could make it a lot easier to use.
But is that in our purview?
I would say no, but there's two things. One is, sorry, no asterisk. One is it is in the purview of your counselors, and your counselors, we're double dipping with this. We're both giving them their housing analysis and also giving you all a drive-by of your zoning code. And also, one could argue that unnecessary complexity is a barrier to
Yes.
any goal that you want to extend it. Like if you think you want somebody to develop housing, you arguably would want it to be clear and easy so that they know what they were getting to. Alternatively, you could say it's really unclear how to make a conservation subdivision work, and we really want conservation of more open space. So let's like make that as clear as day. So I think there's benefits that are downstream from your purview. But that particular issue is definitely leading into the double dipping for sure.
And to put a finer point on it, are you saying that when you've looked at these for other towns, like ours is more complex than others of similar size? Like what is this?
I would say, so there's multitudes of towns and many codes I haven't read, but I would say that it struck me as complex for the size of the community and the typologies that I understood you all to be going for. And there's a fun slide coming up that I think you're gonna enjoy on that specifically. So,
And just real quick to add on top of that, I do think that an outcome, a goal could be, allow more housing development or something like that. And an action item could be to recommend a recode, right? To recommend that the council appoints this committee to do a recode or something like that. So I think all this is obviously super, super relevant, but could be put into a plan.
you're absolutely right. That's a very reasonable takeaway. Our code is not serving us in the way we want it to. We recommend that the council does something about that. Yeah, that's a totally valid recommendation. One other thing for the sort of resilient sustainability folks in the room, it might be buried somewhere else. Again, I think it's organized differently. Sometimes when you're talking about stormwater runoff, a community will say a particular design storm. So like the 1% storm or the 5% storm. And so you sort of know to what level that means something to civil engineers. It doesn't totally mean anything to me. But a more intense storm is obviously going to have greater and different impacts than a more regular little storm. And so it's different to have to maintain a certain level of water from a certain level of storm on your property past the pre-development conditions than it is for a different level of storm. And so some communities, like I believe Portland says the 100-year design storm. I know I've seen in other communities nearby that use the 25-year design storm. I think you could probably argue as a best practice as we get into intensity and climate issues and all of that stuff, that maybe being prepared for a greater event might be beneficial, but again, that's a value judgment.
Has the 100-year storm changed recently?
So this is where we rapidly get out of my depth. I apologize. I know that you're supposed to get a 100-year storm. You're supposed to have a 1% chance of getting the 100-year storm every year, I think. And I think there are folks who would say that as the climate is changing, storms of greater frequency may happen more often, which you would think would change the percentage. But I feel it's such a low content.
That would be something that they or someone would have to change.
Oh, no, sorry, that's a local,
That's local.
like so Portland says the 100-year design storm. Yarmouth says the 25-year storm. So there is, but like, and again, there might be some aspect of your code that says, oh, actually, we're talking about X, Y, or Z. I haven't yet found it, but that's another just sort of like little tidbit for, again, sustainability and resilience are understandably hot topics right now. And so that's sort of one more way that zoning codes and land use ordinances sometimes impact these things. Finally, and one more allusion to the end slide on recent state laws. One thing that you can do as a community is empower your staff to do a certain level of staff review up to a certain point. There, I think reasonably, anybody would want to go in front of Lorraine on the planning board and present their case and say, hey, like, it's a cool process, and Lorraine is a nice person. I think, at least. But that is an extra level of step and public process and potential controversy that people need to go through. And there are different thresholds that communities can set in terms of what is the level that is appropriate for staff to review versus what is the level that needs to be held in a public forum by a public body.
So that means when the amazing Bridget, who took over the amazing town planner, identifies ways that we can optimize our ordinances for the process, he will typically come to us, then you'll go to the planning board, then you'll go back to us. And sometimes you go to ordinance first, right? I feel like you have to jump through 15 different hoops. All are very, very public and they get the outcome, but it also is that sort of the TLDR here, which is we can make it more efficient for Bridget and other town staff members to do what they need to do without going through.
I don't think you could make it more efficient, but what I think you could, there are two things. One is you could make a review process for certain projects more efficient. To get there, you'd have to go through the inefficient process. But the other thing that you can do is, Bridget is in a different position than I am as an employee of Cumberland. I'm coming in here and saying, hey, here are all these goofy things about your zoning code. Whereas that might be a harder or stranger thing for her to do in her position. Sometimes it can just be helpful for a council or a community to explicitly say, we know it's goofy. We want to meet on this once a year so that as you come up with ideas, you can, we have it on the calendar that you're going to come up with these like, hey, what if we did this, 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 or this? So it's both making it easier on applicants sometimes from the process, as well as just sort of saying, hey, there might be opportunities you as staff probably are going to come across them regularly. Maybe we can talk about that on a regular basis.
Yeah, and we do have built in right now a site plan. There are three different levels of review. So there's a minor staff review, which is just me. And there's requirements for that. There's a major staff review, which is me and the department head. So it would go to the code enforcement officer, the police chief, the town manager, the fire chief, and all that. And then essentially over 3,000 square feet of a building, that needs to go to planning board right now. So anything less than 3,000 square feet, that's being built, developed, amended, then I can essentially approve that. So there's some level in there. It'll be interesting to see what other towns do with that. Those levels. And then kind of to answer your question too, the ordinance says who can initiate certain chapter revision for the ordinance. So the planning board is allowed to initiate revisions, which I've done plenty of in the last year. And then some of the revisions to the ordinance have to come under council, and council chooses to come before the committee or not. Where they start, just because I know.
But the overall takeaway was site plan seems all right. So like, we can focus on other stuff. We can think about subdivision and the zoning code a lot. There's always things to improve. There's always things that you can organize differently. So we could either do this in like not 10 minutes. So like we could do the quick version, or we could like really get into the dirt and dig around and like spend 3 hours. So like I defer to you all. Suffice it to say, this is at a certain level, and if we want to go deeper, want to go back, that's really kind of fine. There are a lot of zones which we'll list out in the very near future, a lot of overlay zones that we will also list out in the near future. And sort of a couple things that have already come up a little bit. There's sort of small things that you can do as a community to make more housing available, or emphasize preservation or open space, or any number of things. There are also sort of like really big swings or sort of bigger opportunities that are just a little bit more of a hard lever to pull. So one of the things that we talked about before was dimensional standards, that Excel list of, your various dimensional standards. If you have a 50-foot setback, that could be a 10-foot setback, that is arbitrarily making a parcel less flexible for development, where you could maybe fit more units on a parcel or make a parcel work in a way that it wouldn't have worked otherwise. Again, there very well may be reasonable, rational, supportable reasons for the 50-foot setback. But to not acknowledge that that is a choice and an option would be on some level malpractice. So that's sort of, again, all of these things, if you so choose, can be changed, and those will drastically impact what can be developed reasonably where. Similarly, parking standards are often cited as a development barrier, in the sense that if you say you need 2.5 parking spaces per dwelling unit, which I believe is your current standard, then that's a lot of space that you're going to have to provide for a 10-unit building or a 10-unit development. Parking stalls are 9 by 18. So that's space that can't be used for housing. It has to be used for a car. So it could be less if you wanted it to be. It could be more if you wanted it to be. Another sort of just thing that is worth acknowledging is that zoning can be changed. Like you don't have to just change the dimensional standards. You could literally say this zone should be another zone, or you could create another zone that better meets your requirements. Like everything is on the table. Ideally, and getting back to your initial question, Meg, like this will be downstream of your vision of where do we want to preserve and or prevent development, and where do we want to grow and or encourage development. One of the things that I think is also always worth noting, there's a pretty cool term about mobile homes, where it's like naturally occurring affordable housing, in the sense that it's like it's unsubsidized. There's not necessarily like it might not be the town putting in a financial stake in a project or something like that, getting tax credits, but because it is a more efficient process of developing homes, the final price point can be significantly cheaper. And so I want to say every community in the state is required to have an area that allows mobile home parks, but that doesn't have to be a lot of area. And so one thing that you could also do if you wanted to pull a lever would be to expand where mobile home parks can go in, because again, that tends to be a more efficient way of getting affordable housing. Yeah.
Are they currently allowed in like RR1 and RR2?
So there's two little, actually, you can go to the next one.
Yeah, your zoning map.
So there's two, maybe the next one, if that's okay.
Overlay, yeah.
So I think it's here.
They're
And
allowed in the fairground.
the fairground, yeah. Sure, cool. So, and maybe, here, and fairgrounds.
They're allowed.
And it was just, that's just to say, reasonable folks can, make different calls about what, patterns should be where. But that is just, one thing that like literally that zone could be expanded if that was appropriate.
And you are allowed to build a mobile home or put a mobile home in RR1 and RR2. State law allows you to put a dwelling unit on your property.
Anywhere there's a single
But
family.
you're saying you're allowed to have your own mobile home. That's very different than having a farm.
Right.
Exactly. Right. And anywhere that you have a single family homes allowed, you have to consider, you already do consider per state law, a manufactured home, a mobile home, there's different terms. That has to be allowed there. So yeah, you can still have mobile homes. But again, there's a deficiency to development pattern that is an option.
Are those current parcels on public water and sewer?
I do not know off the top of my head.
So, parcel on Route 1 should be the one off Harris Road, probably not, and the fairgrounds would not.
And if we were to look, if you want them to, should they be on public water and sewer? Does that make it more attractive for, with possibly developing
So there's,
home or a park or?
that is a great question. There are multiple provisions throughout your ordinances that say, if you are in this circumstance, like if you are doing this kind of development, the minimum lot size is this, and the minimum size for dwelling unit is this. But if you're on public sewer and water, the minimum size is significantly smaller. So yes, and that is one of the things that you say in, I believe, the mobile home park zoning district as well, is if you are on public water and sewer, then you get the smallest necessary space to develop. Like, so it's the most efficient pattern because the resources are there and it's acceptable. So that is a way that you can like sort of differentiate. And your zoning code does already differentiate, like sometimes in ways that had my head spinning from that Excel sheet where I was like, wait, hold on. What in this different, like there's 12 different zones and there's 12 different scenarios for each different zone. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but like that sort of gets to, I think, to Meg's foundational question, like, is this in our purview? When we're talking about capital improvements and investments and things that the community should be investing in, you could very well decide that expanding public water and sewer is beneficial because it allows for greater development at a more efficient scale. Somebody else could also easily say, whoa, no, I don't want that because that enables development at a greater scale. Your mileage may vary.
Okay, so I think under the current zoning rule that, yeah, it would help to be on water and sewer, but just our experience with building our house, when they came to do all our septic stuff, they were commenting on how much septic and wastewater fields have improved, and that current zoning in Cumberland is very more conservative than it needed to be for water for protection. So that was just my experience building a house.
Ethan, can you repeat that? So are you on septic?
We're on water, but not sewer.
Okay,
So that was the other scenario he's talking about.
right.
So we have public water, we don't have sewer, and then when there's the minimum lot size, whether you're on sewer or off sewer. But then when they came to work on design our septic, they had mentioned, you can actually get away with a lot smaller lot space. You can put more stuff on as far as like, their professional industry was concerned, then is sort of allowable under the current Cumberland zoning. Because I think those choices were made a long time ago when the technology was worse and the engineering design was worse, and we've learned a lot in the last 30 or 40 years.
And I think that, and I know Peter's not here tonight, but he talked about the history of the hydrogeologic study that was done I don't know how long ago, but a while ago, that drove the RR1, RR2 designation. And I'm wondering if that has changed with the technology.
That's what they made it sound like. I mean, that's
Yeah.
not my area of expertise, but it would be interesting to dive into. I think for one of the subcommittees here.
And I think conversations with developers and I would say that seems true from what I've been learning. It's just the technology and septic system, who needs sewer is basically what I've kind of learned is the septics are so good. They're so efficient now that, the lot sizes can be smaller.
There's the leach field might be now smaller.
Or like the whole system, they have these really high efficiency systems that they're putting in, and I'm certainly not an expert, but it's just a lot. So we have a 2-acre requirement and a 1 acre in areas. If you're on sewer, you could have just a flat zoning requirement of 1 acre zoning or half-acre zoning, and you'd be fine with the current septic. We can no longer use septic as an excuse.
And so the state actually has a requirement for, and this will come into play later in our state law section. The state has a requirement for lot size minimums on like when septic is happening, when you're not on a sewer line. And that is 20,000 square feet. But there's also like, I think exceptions and there's ways that you can calculate different stuff. So 20,000, again, terrible. It's 20,000 is, way less than 2 acres, you know what I mean? So, so on some level, those dimensional standards may be achieving other goals in terms of open space, character, aesthetic, density, development potential, but they're way above and beyond what would be the statute requirement, because the state says 20. I feel like the temperature swings like swung again, and like I'm literally sweating, and now I'm like, oh, I'm nice. So, yeah. I mean,
Just change it by 40 degrees, right?
Either. We'll just have to keep going.
So I guess, Bridget, if we could go to the next slide. So I am being a bit of a jerk here. But as a person who is coming to this code fresh and, doesn't live in Cumberland, I found it hilarious that when I was thinking like, oh, okay, what is an area that might be, kind of like a traditional, like, small town village. Well, there's village medium density residential, but there's also village mixed use, but there's also mixed use, and then there's also town center. Yeah. And it is entirely possible that the town center means something to you all that is separate than the village. Mm-hmm. But as an outsider, that didn't strike me as like, oh, that makes a ton of sense. And then you'll notice that there's other sort of fascinating overlaps and groupings in the sense of there's the highway commercial district, the office commercial north, the office commercial south, the village center commercial, the village office commercial one, the village office commercial two. And then adding to the complexity is that there are overlay zones.
All right, Christian, I gotta intervene here. A number of these weird zones like the VOC1, the VOC2, and the village mixed use came directly from the effort some 15 or 20 years ago to rezone Route 100 in West Cumberland.
Yeah.
That's where you find these zones.
Yes.
So they took I was on the committee, took two existing zones, highway commercial and local business, and created 5 zones of varying intensity for allowable commercial development. So they were a creation of that citizen subcommittee which study that corridor specifically.
Yeah.
So you don't find them intermingled all around the town.
Exactly, yes, no, they were created for a very specific reason.
Exactly,
At a
that's-
very specific point in time.
Yes,
The,
that's right.
where I'm not being a jerk about their creation. Where I'm being a jerk is, at some point, when you have an amalgamation of so many things over things that made sense at a specific point in time, it may be worth examining whether that is still best serving or it could be simplified. And I think what drives that point home a little bit more is that, and I don't know if it was at the same time or after, I assume after, at some point, it seems that there were other development patterns and priorities that were established. And so if we go to the next slide, then we have the Route 100 corridor residential, the West Cumberland housing overlay, the office commercial south mixed use overlay. Like at some point, it seemed like the base zones weren't meeting the needs of a couple different areas. And so an overlay was put on to, I assume, fix that. That is a completely valid solution. But at some point, you end up with a bunch of zones and a bunch of overlays. And the overlays at some point beg the question. So there's a particular wording, I think, in the West Cumberland housing zoning overlay where it says, this is explicitly intended to, and I think this is what you were getting at before. This is explicitly intended to facilitate housing development in a way that is affordable and yields a good long-term like product and all of this stuff. A reasonable downstream question of that would be if those dimensional standards are required to make housing affordable or at a level that we're, saying we want, then is there a drawback to not having that same provision in a broader area? And again, these are all just reasonable, people can disagree. But it gets really complicated really fast when we're talking about water, sewer, dimensional standards and the interplay between the zones and the overlay zones.
Your experience as an outsider, just irrelevant of the content of the zones, number of different zones. How does Cumberland stack up against its peers? Do we have more or less or about the same?
I would love to see that academic study.
Okay.
I do not feel confident or comfortable guessing. But again, my gut feeling was, and this is just one, I hate the phrase to skin a cat, but this is just one way to do so. It sounds sometimes in the conversations that you all have had as a body, that there is an interest in, and also the previous comprehensive plans that we've reviewed, that there is an interest in preserving a rural character. And there is an interest in some sort of community facilitation, maybe additional housing, maybe walkability or economic development, a certain kind of like village core. You could, again, because literally everything is on the table, you could say the three styles of development we want are rural preservation, village core, and something else in between. It doesn't have to be all of these different things with all of these different overlays. Literally everything is on the table. You all are.
And I was gonna say the complexity that this brings for the residents of Cumberland is they show up to a planning board meeting because there's going to be a development. And they're very passionate either for it or against it or somewhere in between. And they want their voices heard. And we're looking at zoning overlays, approved uses of that particular parcel, did they check, meet all the blocks, and you're good to go. And I think the frustration for community members is they're not gonna go and read all the stuff and come to the meeting and be fully aware that what's before the planning board is something that we're going to approve because it's a use of that land that is approved and they can do it. And it's very hard to hear the frustration in the community because of that complexity that they would have to understand in order to stand before us and have a compelling argument to turn our heads and for us to say, no, we're not approving this.
It's almost like.
Really quick, to be honest with you, like with, we see it also with, the zoning for businesses, right? The Rusty Lantern can by zone be open for 24 hours a day, right? Versus the businesses like Rise Pizza. I don't know if people heard about the Rise Pizza additional hour. That caused all sorts of controversy. And so some residents feel like, hey, why can the Rusty Lantern be open for 24 hours a day? And the businesses and the TCP have to close at 9 p.m. And that can raise very uncomfortable, like it not only is confusing, but can also raise questions about equity within certain parts of the town, right?
Absolutely.
You mean, it's just like, it's, you're saying we all like ice cream. Of course we all like ice cream, but the definition of what is ice cream matters.
Yeah.
And we're not getting into that necessarily with some of these questions.
And I think that is a really helpful point in the sense of we're not saying that if you have a perfect zoning code, all of your problems will go away. Like, and everybody will be happy about the style of the development and they'll never be upset at the planning board and you'll have a perfect balance of uses. Like that is absolutely not what we're saying. There will still be controversy. There will still be people who have different perspectives on what should or shouldn't be allowed. But at the moment, there is, like, you can see the geologic layers of how this zoning code came to be, and it makes perfect sense. The question is it serving the community as well as it could right now? And that is entirely up to you. Is it worth getting into the details of this stuff? It is entirely possible it is not. But again, I had to tell you all this. But yeah, what is ice cream to different folks?
I'm going to try to remain neutral in my comments. One of the things that Cumberland is unique about it is a small geographic community. So any change that we make has a tremendous impact. And so the complexity of the zoning map, I think is reflective of a small community. You get away from Portland and it's, anything goes for the most part because they want something, anything. But, one potential business in a neighborhood has the potential of disrupting everybody's lives. And our commercial districts down in Route 1, a little piece on Route 9, and hopefully some growth area of 100. Those are going to dramatically change our community. And, I think when we talk about zoning maps and we say, what do we do? Well, we can scrap everything and then, rewrite it. But I think what the exercise is going to be is what do we want from this? What do we want to encourage? Well, I think none of us want more McMansions. And so we're not, we don't want to encourage the zoning map to reflect building more of those. So I think the exercise is going to boil down to, what do we want for the future of this community, and who do we want to bring in? Who do we want to, what services, businesses, a diverse makeup of our people that live in the community, different economic strata. So the changes in our zoning really should be reflective of what we want to do.
Absolutely. No, and I think you also hit the nail on the head in terms of why this is hard, in the sense of if the community determines that a store being open past a certain time is a need or a desire, that will have an impact on somebody's life, or it at least may have a perceived impact on somebody's life. And one of the hard things about public policy is just trade-offs, drawbacks, and resistance to change versus the potential of the future. And so, again, I think a large part of the way that this came to be in the form that it is a recognition that, and I'm making up random things here, oh, the pizza place wants to be open another 2 hours, or, oh, it would be fine to have a cafe here. So we're gonna extend the zoning a little bit and we'll make it really, really specific and it'll only apply to this particular thing. And on one hand, that gives tremendous control and doesn't allow for negative externalities to come in. The backside of that is that, again, it doesn't leave flexibility for organic growth, different development patterns that might not have been foreseen. It's like they both have their pros and cons, and both are supposed to, regardless, it's supposed to be rooted in what do we want our community to be in the future? And this is a hard reality of making that happen. But also, the one last point is, just because the community says we are going to zone for coffee shops doesn't necessarily mean that the market will provide a bunch of cute little coffee shops. Like, there are other things. This is just one of the filters to getting the end results that the community may seek to get.
As the foresight person on the committee, I feel like I have to raise my hand in defense of big mansions. Comment.
Where do you want to go? So, we're gonna get into state law really soon. There's 1 or 2 slides after this, but again, this is just a reminder. You all are the wizard behind the curtain. Like, this is just people making decisions, and the decisions can be different or they can be the same. I'm not telling you what is right or wrong, just that it's not a biblical thing that needs to be the way it is today. Oh, wow, this is for you. So yeah, ideally, the foundational questions are a couple things because these things interact with one another. What was our community? What is it now? What would we like it to be? Are the zones achieving what we want them to? If they're achieving what you want them to, leave it alone, it's fine. If they're not achieving what you want them to, then that's when we need to have a discussion. And then again, that's sort of 2 sides of the same coin. Can we be more directive and ensure exactly what we want? Or can we be more flexible to say, we're never going to be able to specifically say this, and this will result in the perfect thing. So we're not even we're going to leave some room for creativity. Those are just constantly in tension with one another. And then we're not going to get too deep into this, but this is another academic exercise that I think we all could go down a rabbit hole on. There's a whole other layer of analysis here, which is if you think about whether the zoning as it exists is representative of the parcels that exist, in the sense that there's a bunch of non-conforming lots in condos. And so if the low density or rural residential has a minimum lot size of 2 acres, there's still going to be a ton of parcels that don't meet that. And so sometimes the zoning might be aspirational, sometimes it might be reflective of where the community wants to go, but that's sort of a whole other layer of at some point when you call a spade and say this is the kind of development pattern and we either want to change it or not, but you kind of have to name it in order to be able to do that. And I think, is it possible you're pulling up a Google map?
It's possible, but it's not.
Maybe it'll
I did do some research while we we're sitting here. I haven't gotten very far though. Okay, so Cumberland has 16, Yarmouth has 17, Gray has 13. So
So you're within your peers, you know, like I would say, are your peers? Are your peers zoning codes accomplishing what they want them to? That is an exercise in the discussion that they would need to have. Like, so there's no wrong or right answer. But yeah, that sounds reasonable. They would be the order of magnitude the same. I would also imagine that all of their codes are probably more complex and difficult than they absolutely need to be. But that's, you know, is it worth going into the details on that? Maybe not. So yeah, Bridget, want to talk us through this?
Yeah, quickly. So Christian touched on non-conforming lots, so I have notes here. Basically, a non-conforming lot is a parcel of land that was legally established at one point, and then zoning came in on top of it and then made it illegal. So that is the definition of a non-conforming lot. So as we're just looking at zoning and talking about zoning, I wanted to do this analysis for a really long time, and Ava actually was able to put it on the map for us. And so we can actually see here some of our residential areas with non-conforming just based on lot size. So there's a lot of different ways that a parcel could be non-conforming. It could be that
the gray, that's the non.
yeah, the darker ones are non-conforming, and just rough table here, the column on the right is the percent of parcels that are non-conforming in the zoning district. So LDR, 80% of the parcels are non-conforming, just based on lot size alone. That doesn't even touch use. So if something was a store and was allowed to be a store under previous zoning, then we came in and made it a residential only zoning, that would also indicate non-conformance to current zoning, but this is just lot size.
But they can't.
So
They do
MBR is
not expect that.
That's really high.
it's basically
Original black gray is not.
The darker shades in the zoning district, so 88% in MDR, 67% are non-conforming in R1, 37 in RR2, 83 in TCD. This is why we've got the overlay in TCD, the setback overlay, because those parcels are small. We're allowed small, and you can't put anything on them. So the relief to the setback is applied through an overlay zone. It's just more data. We could go down this, we could make this a better map. We can just spit out some reports on numbers that I thought was super interesting. I saw Burlington, Vermont do it in some of their comprehensive plan studies, and they did a rezone sort of subsequent to
Is that a
doing
good example for it?
non-conforming.
So
But-
Bridget,
yeah.
what's the big takeaway? If somebody goes to sell their property, the next people that own it have to deal with the non-conformance? or-
Non-conformance just carries with the property.
Okay,
Grandfathered in.
You're grandfathered in, yep,
okay.
and a non-conforming use stays non-conforming as long as it's continued to be used in that way. So if our store that I used as an example then gets residential zoning on top of it, it's allowed to stay a store as long as it operates continuously. Once it stops operating as a store, in our ordinance, the clock starts ticking. If it's no longer operated as a store for 2 years, it then cannot reopen as a store. It has to then conform. And some of the other restrictions to think about are if you go to do anything and you're in a non-conforming lot, you then have to conform to the zone. So it really makes a difference for businesses. That once was allowed. So before our sign ordinance came into being, businesses put signs up, but the second they want to change that sign, they now have to conform with our new zoning code. So that's just a simple example. Did you have a question?
Well, I was just going to ask, so it really limits, if they need to expand their porch by 2 feet to be able to It limits all possibilities.
Yeah, it limit the potential, some of the potential for an ADU with some of the restricted setbacks. I mean, to me, and this is my personal feeling on it, it doesn't make sense that we have zoning that doesn't actually fit the character of what we have going on. And what I've seen in the industry is some studies around non-conformance and just a desire to make it make sense, like have the zoning actually match what's on the ground. So from the get-go, when I saw Burlington do it, I was just super interested because I mean, I live on a non-conforming lot. I knew that it was happening all over the place. And I just think it's helpful to see it. And, a lot of these, I think the reason why the numbers are so high too, is that we're looking at parcels, we're not looking at acreage and size. So some of these parcels are huge. But just total parcel numbers. I mean, we look at it all sorts of different ways too, right? This is just our preliminary analysis to see if there's any interest in maybe pulling more data out of it. So we certainly can do that, but just wanted to
I mean, to me, it looks
touch
like,
on that.
it kind of looks like things start to go in one direction and then it's like, oh, wait a minute, this all feels very reactionary to me. All of it, like the overlays, everything is a reaction to someone's problem or issue or question or concern or whatever. I'm looking at the zoning on the forest side because that's where I live. And yes, there are definitely some places where the lots are smaller. In fact, immediately adjacent to our neighborhood, there is one. And it's like, what was the problem with that? I mean, I guess people who are buying here now probably expect bigger lots, and I don't know, it doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense to me.
I think what you're right though, in that it's rational in the sense of it's human nature to react and respond to things and say, whoa, actually, maybe not that or this. So if everybody was behaving rationally, what you end up with is sometimes situations in which so I imagine a lot of the folks in town with a non-conforming store probably think it's pretty cool that they have a store in their town or in their neighborhood, assuming they don't have, a beef with the owner or something. And so I could imagine a lot of people being upset if that store went away to learn that it couldn't come back or it couldn't be created in a different area to make a similar feel in a different area. But with that, you are opening up a whole Pandora's box of, but maybe it won't be a store you like, and maybe it will be designed in a different way, and maybe it won't have the same community character, and maybe a store won't come in at all. And so, I am offering nothing but unsatisfying answers in that this is just struggling through the human condition of trying to figure out how to create the communities that we want and prevent the things that we know that we don't. And there is no perfect way to it, unfortunately.
And it kind of speaks back to, I think, your earlier slides. What are our priorities? I mean, that's bottom line is as a town, we're here, we want to go here. Here's the journey that's going to happen to get us there. But what are the priorities in that? And that's where I think we have to kind of open our hearts and our minds and figure out what that is and then craft the journey.
Yeah.
And I must say, I'm thrilled with the level of engagement and enthusiasm that you all have brought to this exercise. I mean, there was like an audible gasp when Bridget brought up her non-conforming lot snap and
So many
so I think we're actually winding down, and I'm going to be accused significantly of burying the lead. But these are, I think we've settled now, important questions to wrestle with that can be defined in different ways. So if we can go to the next one, and I might surprise myself. Okay, cool. So this is your growth and rural areas. This is, what the last comp plan process determines. Rural is purple and green is growth. This may or may not align, and it may or may not align in perfect ways with the text of your zoning code, as we sort of went through.
Sorry, so this isn't actually like a zoning, this isn't like a rule.
Nope.
This is the recommendation.
This is what your current zoning is supposed to be based off of or reflecting, in the sense of these are the areas you want to preserve. These are the areas you want to like filter for. So on some level, they should be connected. This is like part of the legal basis for your zoning.
So like, do you look at that when you're doing your,
What is that?
do you look at this when you're doing your, like, is this part of your decision-making process? Is this map, but like, is it a rule?
So I would say that responsibility falls on the community and the council.
Okay.
And, you know, everybody's to sort of say, does our zoning code meet this? And if it doesn't meet this, how do we change it? And now we're going through a new process and saying, what do we want our growth areas and rural areas to be?
Well, and we do have a criteria to make sure that the development is a non-comprehensive plan.
Yes.
So this part would be part of the comprehensive plan. This is accepted by the state. And right now are our designated growth and rural areas for the state, and that becomes important.
Yes.
But there is like development happening in rural areas.
There is development happening in the rural areas.
And so I think that gets to this whole idea of like, there can be a spectrum of desired outcomes. And to some degree, development is going to happen regardless.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I know you all highlighted previously was, oh, interesting. The comp plan committees that came before us in their comp plans are highlighting some of the same concerns that we're talking about now.
Mhm.
And again, part of that is just because it's hard to, you know, make society work. But also, you could argue that there possibly could have been harder swings in a direction or policy changes or investments that might have leaned more into change, which would have been uncomfortable. But when you don't lean into that, then that also means it's likely the same issues are going to be playing.
Do you have to have growth areas in the comp plan?
There are exceptions to it. I don't believe, we can go to the text about it. I don't think that Cumberland would qualify. But there is a way, according to state law, to prove that you shouldn't have a growth area.
But it's the same principle as cluster planning, you know, if you're gonna have places that you conserve, you gotta have places that you grow, so you can't everything be everything. That makes sense.
Yeah. And I think getting to Bridget's point of like things reflecting things is, if you look at the lot size in some of the purple, it doesn't necessarily feel, just from that look, rural.
Yeah.
And that's not, again, that's not a judgment. That's just saying, okay, if it's not rural, then we can determine that it should be something else. Or if we want it to be rural, we can change, you know, restrictions so that it goes more in that direction.
Alternatively, do you have to have rural? Could everything be growth?
Yes, everything could be a growth.
Okay.
I mean, oh, sorry. I think it would have to, your map has to reflect the details of your town. And that's why we do the data analysis and the mapping, and, you know, natural and historic areas. So like, you wouldn't be able to say, we're gonna blow through this wetland, because that would be on some level, you know.
Like Ryan's Forest and the Watson Woods that they're gonna buy in a couple days. Like a several 100-acre chunk that you'll never be able to develop on. So there's huge tracts of land that you are rural because you can't, they're in conservation, right? So
He's gonna drop a knowledge on us.
I'm just looking quickly at the Maine Growth Management Act, and I read that a state goal is that each community does develop growth areas within its boundaries.
Yes.
So I think,
we have,
although I wasn't part of the last comp plan committee, that when the 09 plan recommended, or actually spelled out the growth areas, that in the late 2000s, they were responding to the requirement of state law.
That is quite likely, yes.
Because as much as you want to provide housing on a lot of places, you're gonna be capped at 50% or so, because you just can't, you're not gonna be able to build quarter-acre suburbs everywhere. If you have these conservation principles, at a certain point, you can only do so much.
That 09 comp plan, there was discussion about not having a growth area. It usually came down to state law requires it, but there was a fair amount of conversation about trying. Of course, there was a difference in opinion back then than there are today. And things have changed. That was part of the discussion that went on back then.
So yeah, these are just the big level things that if you wanted to, you could reduce minimum lot size because the state lot is 20,000 for unsewered lots. And you have lots of sewer areas, so it could be way smaller. You can reduce setbacks, some
Really basic. What is this?
Oh, I'm sorry. That was terrible of me. So like, if you have
From the road?
if this like tile is a lot or whatever, like, let's call, yeah, this is the road going in front of it. So the front setback would be usually from the public road. So if you say you have to have a 50-foot setback from on the front, you'd have to go 50 feet from the road before you can have a structure sort of enter that imaginary plane.
Yep.
Sides would be, usually a little less, 15 feet. And the rear might be 75 feet or 30 feet. But all of those are
Depending what they're next to.
in different heights.
And the
Here.
bound.
They're 50, it's a 15-foot setback for sheds.
But sh-
Everywhere.
but sheds are small.
Side and rear.
Sheds are like,
Rear.
right, 180 square feet.
And this is why we got into so many asterisks.
Whole nother
You can't
solar
put them
tracker.
in the front.
You gotta meet the setback.
It's never simple.
Think of your house lot and its boundaries. You own the whole parcel, but you can't build on every square inch
Right.
of you can't build up to the property line all the way around. You've got to push the development into somewhat.
Plant trees though. Can't put solar track.
Don't put your solar tracker there though.
Put a big tree there.
So there's all sorts of stuff you can do. And now we're gonna get into, again, going to be accused of burying the lead, the stuff that the state has recently determined you must do.
Ooh.
So
Is there a slide for that?
I think so.
Two thousand and three or out.
This is, yeah, subsequent, this is like last week.
Said one.
So there's multiple ones that have impact here.
Yeah.
And this is where growth areas and rural areas, and also our discussions about sewer and water really, really, really come into play. And I hope this swells your hearts with pride that you all have been entrusted with this task. Because it just became that much more serious.
Big government.
So
Allow.
the state or the House and Senate last week passed and the governor signed into law a new series of requirements that are intended to deal with the housing crisis. And it has specifically designates where housing must be allowed at what level. And so there's a couple of these things and they get into the specifics. But so in designated growth areas, there have to be 4 dwellings per lot allowed. In areas that are served by sewer and water, even if they're not designated growth areas, they have to allow 4 dwellings per lot because of that infrastructure. Outside of growth areas and without sewer and water, then you must allow 3 dwelling units per lot. If you go to the next one, it gets a little bit more, again, layers of zoning and complexities here. Within that growth area, one of the ways that you could say, oh, well, you could have 4 units, but it needs to be a minimum lot size of 30,000 square feet or something. And so they're saying, actually, no, the minimum lot size can only be 5,000 square feet at max. And so the state has reduced some of the levers that were available for you all to control. And or you could argue the state pulled the levers, you know what I mean? So they pretty drastically took action. And again, this is not a value judgment. I'm just acknowledging like there were levers and some of them got pulled.
Is it always sewer and water, or is it, there's water but no sewer, sewer but no water?
It is, I believe the way it is worded is always sewer and water.
Okay.
If a lot is located in a designated growth area and is served by a public, special district or other centrally managed water system and a public, special district or otherwise comparable sewer system, a minimum lot size requirement may not exceed 5,000. So
What does otherwise?
what does otherwise comparable mean? We haven't done rulemaking with the law.
Right, 'cause if you've got water.
In Cumberland, we have a very thoughtful and intelligent and sophisticated municipal government. So we don't have to wrestle with these things so much. Other towns, it's gonna be very challenging,
Yeah.
but for us, we've got the resources to figure these things out. So it's not as relevant for us as it is for other smaller communities. Personal opinion.
You feel Longley think that, and you,
I mean,
and you.
That's an MMA thing too.
this is huge. I mean, this is
Yeah.
the tiny non-conforming lots in town are becoming conforming. And if they now want to subdivide, they can, because you only need 5,000 square
Yeah.
feet. And on those 5,000 square feet, if you want to put 4 dwelling units, you can.
And it won't trigger
And
subdivision.
it will not trigger subdivision.
So it doesn't come to the planning board.
It's like,
That's what that means.
And
Yeah.
it lifted a lot of
I
weight.
mean, I'm
And
assuming.
we
it
don't
supersedes
really know what it means.
Setbacks.
Like, we really don't know what it means. She signed this on the 20th.
So it's going back
So
January
that's,
1.
wait, we had a good question. So it would supersede setbacks.
So Cumberland would have to, oh, sorry, go ahead. Steve.
It's too much speculation because the legislature adjourned yesterday. And we need to know whether the two bills take effect 90 days from adjournment, which is the standard rule, or whether each bill specified its own effective date. Sometimes they do that for things which have major municipal impact to give towns and cities an opportunity to readjust to the new reality. I'm going to suggest, Bridget, that we ask our town attorney to provide us, they're going to have to do it for the town council anyway, but to provide us with a summary of these two new laws by the time we meet the next time. They're probably hard at work at it right now.
We've already asked her to come in and speak, so, or, she's gonna, either Alyssa or Bernstein Shore are gonna come and present to council in hopefully the next month, so we could put it all together, yeah. Didn't play it, let's do it.
Bernstein is the new attorney.
Bernstein is the new attorney, however, we are retaining Alyssa Tibbetts, who will be overseeing TIF, most of our housing, so my gut would be that it would be Alyssa covering this.
Okay.
That's what we did with the housing task force with LD 2003. We didn't have a joint session, but they invited everyone to the housing task force to come to the, so we should do that. And I guess with us,
I mean, it might be helpful to have her here too.
Yeah.
Like, I think like, so it's less formal, right? More of like more Q and A, people can really get into it.
Don't quote me on this, but I think in the law, it said that, to Steve's point, I think it said the deadline of July 1st, 2026.
Yeah.
And similar to the way that things happened with LD 2003, the expectation, at least as I understand it, from the state would be over a certain amount of time, maybe July 1st, 2026, maybe longer if it gets edited, the state would expect the town of Cumberland to make its zoning meet these things. And if the town didn't, then it would be liable to, or it would be, a developer could potentially come in and say, your ordinances aren't legal, and they could, take the court action or something. So it's not like tomorrow, guess what? You've got a 4-unit like everywhere. But also, again, and that may or may not be a good thing. I don't know. But growth areas and rural areas suddenly have even more weight than they did before. And sewer and water has even more weight than it did before. So like, again, I'm very happy that you all are in the room to do it because you're invested, you're caring, and you're going to put in the time and the thought and like, work it out and get an exciting time. So.
And they don't differentiate dwelling units between single structures or multi-units.
In subdivision, it does, in the sense of as Bridget mentioned before, subdivision is only 5 or more dwelling units within a single structure. So you could have 4 dwelling units on one lot within a single structure, and it wouldn't be a subdivision.
If they were separate structures on one lot,
If,
you get 4. Is that subdivision?
No, dwelling unit, no.
right, yes, sorry, yes.
Dwelling unit.
And so, but
Is there a word for structure in there?
so I guess all of this is to say, like, there are ways that you can impact the way that it will play out here. But assuming the law continues at some points, there will probably be, as Bridget was saying, some pretty dramatic consequences for the town of Cumberland. And so good that you all are in the room wrestling with these things, trying to figure out how best to do it.
That's the last one.
This is the last one. Sorry that I went so long. I will turn it back over to the chair to do remaining agenda stuff. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge, and this is weird and strange, I'm sorry. Just so you don't get confused or worried about my well-being. I am actually going down to part-time for Chukitad, and so I am almost certainly not going to be at these meetings moving forward. So this was a lovely way to go out. I can't believe that we got to wrestle with zoning together. I will still be here as a resource. I will still be working on discrete technical things as Paul called me in. Callie will still be here. Paul will still be here. But I didn't want you to worry, especially after that spicy hot take on zoning. Like what happened to Christian. So I'm still fine. It's cool.
That's my job.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Chukitad will continue to be a resource moving forward, and I may be part of that resource, but you just won't see my face here.
Are we going to have a team leader?
Paul was still my boss and the project principal or whatever, so that still doesn't change. So Paul is just even more important now than he was before, so, which don't tell him that because. And yeah, sorry, now I will turn it over to the chair.
Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah.
All right, our next meeting has been set for July 10th. And just to go a bit beyond that date, it's on July 14th, the council takes up, among other things, the filling of vacancies on this committee. Am I right?
You are correct,
Okay,
as always.
so,
How many vacancies do we have?
sorry,
How many vacancies do we have?
we have 2, and I don't know if we can definitively say if we have 3.
We expect to have one more, that has not been formalized. I'm trying to get a firm answer.
In all likelihood, there's gonna be 3. We've had 2 resignations along the way. And there is potentially a third one that's going to happen. So anyway, we won't have any new members on July 10th. Invite Jane and Betsy to come back that day, I'm all the same. Also on the 10th, the survey will just have been completed. The only thing we're gonna know for sure is the total number of responses. We won't have any data between, what do we say, end of midnight on July 7 and when we convene 72 hours later, there's not gonna be any analysis available to us. So what I'm getting to is we need to decide what purpose our meeting will be devoted to on the 10th. Now, I had one thought stemming from Christian's final comments and my interjection that there may be a legal briefing on the new laws. The other one is for the 3 umbrella subcommittees to go back to their respective corners and continue on. But it's going to be too soon for us to start wrestling with data from the survey because it just won't be in. And Bridget, you may have had plans anyway. I rudely.
We, similar to that predicament, hypothesized that perchance you would like some more items to process and think about. So one of the options is the data team from GPCOG coming and doing an initial presentation on housing, demographics, population. So some of the data stuff that they've been digging into and started, like that we all will have to wrestle with. I think the thinking was, hey, we've talked about broad goals, we've talked about the history, we've talked about zoning, and now, again, we don't have the answers from the survey, but now we can start doing deep dives targeted into the other data that exists that we'll be processing as parts of our community. So that is an option if you all are
So
interested.
you are set to do that.
Yeah,
As soon as the-
my colleague Rick is probably crafting a presentation
I see, okay.
not as we speak, I hope. But he is ready to do it if you all wish. If you'd rather push that back, that is also fine. And that could certainly go in dovetail with a legal briefing or presentation. Like that doesn't have to be the whole meat of the meeting.
Okay, so we're now in, we will remain in our current holding pattern somewhat on the tenth. Might be a good night to put that sort of presentation on. People agree, what are your thoughts?
Agreed.
Yeah.
And then I think we'll be in a better position on this July 24 to break out in subcommittees with some maybe targeted survey data, or if not, perhaps some more targeted chapter data from Rick and the team.
Exactly.
Okay. All right, so is that, okay, by consensus, I guess we will do that next time, at least for a good chunk of the meeting.
Great.
Anybody else have any new business, old business, things they wanted to raise at this point? We're at the verge of adjourning, so if so, now's the time.
I was,
Kathy.
I went to the library looking for some history on something else, but Tom Bennett did provide a lot of books on old comprehensive plans. And I actually have, it's 1958, I think I told you, and 73, but I've been finding them interesting because they was actually talking about building a good sized school in West Cumberland back in 58. And there just wasn't enough kids at the time or something. And I think something about picking the kids up or also delivering them to school, but long ago, there was only one school bus in 1939, so.
But there was a good
Doing
book
the whole
about the
thing.
history of Cumberland, just came out a couple of years ago.
Huh?
One of the stories wrote it, and it was, going over 400 years. And a lot of these challenges that we face today are not new. They come and they go, and we face these up and downs, and these challenges are just, they're not new. They come and they go.
I think that was the updated version of Phyllis Sweetzer's book,
Sweets are, sorry. Yes.
originally published in 76,
Yes.
updated
Yeah.
3 years ago.
Mhm.
And it's good.
And I just found it interesting. They was trying to describe the land and, but Route 100, they was calling it the spine of the community. Yeah,
Now, by the way, you'll find those books in the
old section.
old section of the library, the Prince Room, by the fireplace,
And there's
annual reports, other documents like that are all cataloged.
actually old maps. You actually aren't supposed to take these out. I explained to her that on Historical Society and plus this committee, and she says, well, it's mostly because when they don't let you take them out, the books are in bad shape. But these are in good shape, and she says, I trust you to, I know where I can find you at Historical. Yeah. So, you're welcome. find in the back that they're not supposed to let them out.
But you can certainly grab them off the shelf, sit down in the library and spend some time with them anytime you want.
Yeah.
The room is always open for that.
There's also books on annual meetings from when the town started that you will find interesting too. They're not the originals. I do have a lot of originals in the Historical Society. We got quite a few collected. But, Thomas again, compiled them and put them into blue books, a little bit smaller than this. But, if you ever are interested in some of the history of our town, it's in the old section of our library.
Anybody else? All right, I'll take a motion to adjourn. All right, thanks, Jesse. A second from somebody? Oh, Nancy did. Okay, all right. Those in favor? All right, thanks, folks. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Happy 4th.
Thank you.
Yeah, enjoy.
Very good. I was just reading the zoning rules. Do I need to go in front of the Board of Appeals to work from home?
Sorry.
You need a home occupation